By the time the yard sign went up, new listing, cozy four-bedroom, great school district, the story had already eaten through the bones of our house. Strangers toured our open concept like archaeologists, fingering the shiplap, complimenting the backsplash, asking the realtor if the sellers were downsizing. I smiled like a mall Santa and said, "You could say that. We're also belief-sizing." That got a pity laugh. On the final Sunday before closing, the church potluck was a casserole parade. Velveeta mac, funeral potatoes, Jell-O with bits of fruit that violated several laws of physics. I stood by the crock pots rehearsing the line I'd say for the rest of my life. 18 years of marriage, and I discovered my wife was a secret surrogate, not an affair in the back seat of a truck, a secret career in the back rooms of a fertility clinic. It sounds like a podcast title someone made up to win the internet. It should have felt noble, right? Helping families, a good deed with hospital bracelets. But betrayal isn't a moral algebra problem. It's a bruise that blooms outward no matter how carefully you explain the angle of the punch. People asked, was she a cheating wife? That phrase made my teeth grind. Infidelity comes in many shapes. She wore one of the quieter ones, calendars thick with lies. We were a quintessential American family with Costco memberships, Target runs, a golden retriever who shed optimism everywhere, and a mortgage that behaved like the stock market during an energy drink relapse. Tuesdays were Little League. Fridays were takeout Thai and a movie we'd both pretend we hadn't already watched. The shape of our life was as familiar as a grocery aisle. Then I found the hospital receipt under a stack of Bed Bath & Beyond coupons, RIP, by the way, and the aisle tilted. If you've never had your marriage snap, the sound is less like a gunshot and more like drywall cracking behind paint. It's the sound of tiny decisions failing. That time I decided not to ask why she smelled like antiseptic. The time I decided not to notice the bruise in the crook of her arm she blamed on Pilates with resistance bands. The time I accepted women's group meeting as a non-answer. I was loyal to the illusion. Call it toxic love if you want, the kind that smiles through smoke. My revenge fantasies came later. Billboards outside the clinic, a Yelp review written by my disappointment, a sermon disguised as a Facebook post. In the moment, I only wanted gravity to slow down. The discovery wasn't cinematic. No lipstick on collars, no motel keycards. It was an AirTag ping. Hers, not mine, showing up where it shouldn't at St. Mark's Medical Plaza, Suite 405. I was at home, half paying attention to the NBA playoffs and sorting socks that had lost their soulmates to the dryer. My phone nudged my pocket. "Left behind, Claire's wallet," the screen announced. Left behind where? That tiny blue dot pulsed next to a fertility clinic. An entire conspiracy board bloomed in my skull. I drove there on muscle memory, parked my sensible dad sedan between a pair of SUVs with stick-figure families on their rear windows, and sat until I could taste my heartbeat. The lobby was a whisper factory. Water feature, succulents, women flipping through glossy brochures like they were reading a future. I didn't go in. I watched a reflection, hers, glide toward the elevator. She was in her errands uniform, leggings, oversized sweater, baseball cap that said lake life, even though our lake is mostly ducks with personality disorders. I should have called out. Instead, I memorized the numbers her finger pressed, 405. That night, she said she'd helped a friend move a sofa. I nodded like a bobblehead left on a hot dashboard. After she went to shower, I rifled the purse on the chair. It felt ugly, and I did it anyway. Beneath the gift cards and gum wrappers, I found the receipt. Not sofa-related, blood work, ultrasounds, legal intake fee. Words like intended parents and cycle and gestational carrier in fonts that tried to make them palatable. There are 100 ways to tell the truth. We chose none of them. Over the next week, I learned to read the house like a crime scene. The garage beer fridge where I'd stashed optimism in cans, hummed next to a paper grocery bag full of syringes disguised by a pharmacy pamphlet. Sharp's disposal. The calendar had little stars on days that lined up with the pamphlet's schedule. Her browser history was a museum exhibit. How long after transfer can I run? Best prenatal yoga for surrogates. Can you hide a pregnancy under cardigans? When I finally asked a straight question, what is Suite 405? She didn't blink. Dermatology, she said in that playful tone we used when the kids were little and we hid vegetables in spaghetti sauce. Dermato what? I heard the drywall crack. I love you, I started, and I meant it even as my stomach crawled into a corner. But are you living a second life? She put a hand on my cheek like she was blessing a child. Don't be dramatic, she said. This isn't those Reddit cheating wife threads you listen to like bedtime horror. I'm not sneaking off to a motel. I'm helping. Helping what? Helping who? I was a man on the wrong channel, watching a different game than the one being played. Our kids drifted through the kitchen with teenage weather systems gathering on their faces. They heard the edges of everything. You two good? Our daughter asked in that careful, professional voice kids use when they've learned adult concern too early. We're fine, my wife said. We're a strong family, I added, and the words did an awkward somersault and landed on their heads. At the potluck, someone's aunt pressed my elbow and whispered a prayer that sounded like a non-disclosure agreement. Later, as I carried a deviled egg tray to the car, my neighbor, the one with the HOA gavel and the live, laugh, lake life vibe turned up to 11, said, "Heard there's trouble. You know, my cousin's wife's sister's friend did that surrogate thing. Saintly. But secrets are a form of infidelity, aren't they?" The word stuck to me like church glitter. Infidelity. Not sex, but secrecy. Not heat, but cold. On the drive home through a suburb that looked like a catalog for stability, I realized revenge wasn't the point, and it also tasted delicious. Eventually, I'd choose lawyers and lists and custody schedules over public shaming, because I am, despite everything, boring in a way that keeps children fed. But first, there was the night I opened the beer fridge and stared at the needle disposal like it was a time machine. If I could just recycle the right moment, could I save the day where she said, "I want to talk about something big"? And I said, "Okay, I can handle it." And then we handled it like grown-ups who loved each other more than their own fear. The sign in our yard told the truth other people could understand. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, betrayal included, at no extra cost. "Why are you selling?" the couple asked during the second showing. "We're relocating," I said. It was almost true. We were relocating our futures to 2 smaller houses with less laughter, more calendar math. 18 years. A lifetime that fit into cardboard, sharpied with room names that used to be our children's voices. The ending came first. The origin story would come later, whether I wanted it to or not. Before the receipt, there were other ghosts, tiny ones. The way her phone learned to sleep face down. The way the group chat named moms multiplied like rabbits. Moms, moms 2, moms, no kids, allowed, moms, super private. Claire invented volunteering gigs with titles that sounded government adjacent. Community Wellness Task Force, Maternal Support Coalition, Local Liaison for Women's Health. We lived in a land of laminated name tags. The first time I noticed the bruise in the crook of her arm, she laughed. "New Pilates teacher," she said. "He thinks I'm an elastic band." I kissed the bruise. I am not a monster. She smelled like hospital soap and Starbucks. Americans can hide anything under the scent of a caramel macchiato. Our life was gentle choreography. Saturdays were orange slices at soccer games. Sundays were church followed by Costco, where we bought Virtue by the case. I'd load the trunk while she checked her calendar, eyebrows doing math. "We're good," she'd say, and the words were a blessing and a blindfold. In the evenings, we'd watch shows about crime and announce, like very private jurors, who the guilty party was 10 minutes in. It will not surprise you that I was wrong about most of the endings. You don't start a conspiracy board with red string. You start with a sigh you don't know how to translate. You start with your wife driving to the other side of town to deliver a meal to a friend, and returning 3 hours later with the same empty casserole dish and eyes that looked like she'd watched a sad movie without headphones. You start with Amazon boxes that deliver needles labeled craft supplies, a bulk order of prenatal vitamins because they were on sale, and a heating pad that lives under the bed like a sleeping pet. The pharmacy knew her by name. She shrugged and said, "That stomach bug really kicked my butt." It was February. Everything kicks your butt in February. The first time she said women's group, she meant the praise and pie night at church. The 15th time she said it, she meant something that met inside office park elevators and asked you to turn off your location sharing. "You trust me, right?" she asked one night, spinning her ring like a roulette wheel. "With my life," I said, which was the truth and also vaguely theatrical. We were a good family. There's that word again, family, strong enough to survive a bad paycheck, a flooded basement, a teenage son discovering sarcasm like it was a weapon he'd smuggled from a fantasy novel. But we weren't strong enough, apparently, to survive silence. If you're keeping score, here's when I almost went full conspiracy, the Girl Scout cookie table outside the grocery store. The mom in charge, sleek ponytail, lanyard that sparkled with competence, smiled too hard when she said hi to Claire. They spoke in code. Later in the car, I asked, "Who was that?" Claire said, "Oh, just someone from Pilates, the way you say, just gravity." 2 weeks later, I saw the same woman at St. Mark's Medical Plaza, wearing scrubs you could iron with a stern glance. She nodded like we shared a secret. I didn't, but by then I was fluent in pretending. I created a private dictionary. Volunteer meant injection schedule. Errands meant labs. Prayer retreat meant transfer prep. No phones meant, if you ping my AirTag, I will cry in the parking lot. The night I followed her, I was less a husband than a detective with a clearance sale trench coat. I parked my car in the shadow of a landscaping truck and watched my wife, the mother of my children, the woman who taught me the correct way to fold fitted sheets, step into an elevator whose doors closed with the finality of a magic trick. I didn't go up. I sat, hands on the steering wheel, imagining every man I know sitting in this same trembling posture, performing the ritual of doubt. Usually the ritual involves a motel and someone else's cologne. Mine involved a potted fern in the lobby and a pamphlet titled Your Journey to Parenthood. I could have confronted her then. I could have marched into Suite 405 and said, "Hi, this is my wife, the one who promised me a life. Could someone please tell me what that life currently includes?" Instead, I drove home, argued silently with the GPS, and arrived before she did. Our house looked innocent. The dog looked guilty. The kids were upstairs sharing TikToks that taught them how to become better liars than their parents. When she came in, she put a tote bag gently on the kitchen island, like it contained a sleeping sparrow, and said, "Long night. Everything okay here?" I said, "Of course," because American marriages are built on the sacrament of course. She showered while I opened the tote bag with the slow respect of someone disarming a bomb. Inside, protein bars, a heating pad, a folder. The folder contained a contract. Contracts speak a specific language. They make betrayal sound like policy. Gestational carrier shall, intended parents agree to, all parties acknowledge. The legalese turned my pulse into algebra. Some paragraphs were blacked out, which is a color that should not exist in a marriage document. The fee schedule was highlighted in yellow, like God himself wanted to make sure we understood the numbers. I closed the folder, put everything back exactly as it had been, and stood there with the kitchen light, turning the marble into an interrogation table. If you want to know what I'm like in crisis, know this. I emptied the dishwasher. Revenge would have to wait. The plates needed a home. When she came downstairs, hair wet, skin clean, I asked, "You okay?" She kissed my shoulder and said, "Always," then tilted her head. "Why?" I said, "Just checking." This is the dialogue that ruins kingdoms. The next morning, the neighbor HOA president texted a reminder about lawn length and garbage can visibility, crimes that keep our suburbs safe. I stared at the text a long time and wondered how many other houses on our block were held together with decorator pillows and mutually assured quiet. On my lunch break, I made a spreadsheet labeled questions because I'm a man of lists. How many times? Where did she go when she said Nashville for the women's conference? What did our kids know? What did the money do? Could I forgive a lie whose purpose was to give other people the thing we bragged about in Christmas cards? The spreadsheet turned into a map. The map turned into a blueprint. The blueprint turned into a mirror. If I was being honest, my least favorite hobby, I liked being the hero of my suspicion. It made me clean, and it made her the villain. I could say cheating wife with a catastrophist's glee. But the more I learned, the careful timing, the lonely hormone storms, the clockwork of hope, and no guarantee, the more the villain shape trembled. Betrayal was still betrayal. My chest didn't become a forgiving church just because I understood logistics, but I could feel the plot twisting under my feet, preparing to drop me into a room with fewer answers and more versions of the truth than any of us could hold. When the confession came, it was not in a cathedral of honesty. It was in a Honda in a pharmacy parking lot, because apparently America writes its sacraments in fluorescent light. Rain stitched the windshield. She said, "I need you to listen without interrupting," which is what people say right before your biography changes genres. I gripped the steering wheel like I could steady the weather. She told the story in chapters the clinic had trained her to narrate. Screening, matching, legal, meds, transfer, heartbeat, term. It sounded like a marketing deck for hope. She had learned the liturgy from other women in leggings, women who passed phones around with pictures of babies they never named. It started, she said, with the feeling that motherhood had handed her a chorus and taken her solo. Then her sister's infertility diagnosis took up residence at our breakfast table. She joined a support group to help her sister. The group helped her find a purpose that wasn't just carpools and reminding me where we kept the peeler. I wanted to be strong for my family, she said. And there was that word again, family, expanding and contracting like a lung until I didn't know who was breathing. The agency modeled itself on a wellness brand. If you've ever seen a boutique gym and thought, what if this sold babies the way it sells abs? You get the vibe. Soothing fonts, scented waiting rooms, contracts with the aroma of lavender. There were NDAs that sounded like bedtime stories. There were alumni boards where successful surrogates posted photos of vacations bought with altruism. I didn't do it for the money, she said, and then quieter, but the money mattered. Our savings account had grown without explanation. My pride had enjoyed the story that I was suddenly better at work. In reality, our college fund had been fertilized by secrets. My chest was a courtroom. Prosecution. She lied repeatedly with intent. Defense. She helped repeatedly with love. The judge was me with less sleep. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, and hated how small I sounded. She looked past my face at the wipers. "Because you would have said no," she said, and I had already said yes. That was the moment the floor dropped a few inches. I've heard infidelity described as the theft of a choice. I felt robbed of the chance to be my wife's partner in the one story that remapped our bodies and our calendars. Cheating doesn't require a second person. Sometimes it's just secrecy with better PR. I ask the practical questions because that's how some of us hold back hysteria. How many times? Twice before, years ago, when our auntie's weekend was actually a quiet birth 3 states away. Once almost, a failed transfer that she grieved inside Target while holding a pack of paper towels like a life raft. Now, the current cycle. "You were going to carry through the holidays," I said, and pictured our family Christmas card with my wife's sweater arranged strategically, while strangers somewhere lit candles around heartbeat printouts with our calendar at the center like a stolen sun. "You think I'm a villain," she said, not asking but diagnosing. I wanted to say no. I said nothing. "Do you think I'm a cheating wife?" she asked, the term like sand in her mouth. "I didn't cheat," she continued. "I signed. I injected. I carried. I delivered. None of it was sex, and all of it was intimate." I felt queasy with the precision of that sentence. Intimacy without me had existed, thrived, and made money while I fixed the leaky sink and grilled on Saturdays like a patriot. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't stain sheets. It rewrites calendars. It's a clean crime. No lipstick, just hospital bracelets you don't get to see. Anger arrived late and spectacular. I brought up sacred words like vows and transparency and family governance as if we were a startup and she'd pivoted without funding approval. I said toxic love like a diagnosis, ignored my own toxicity, the ease with which I've dismissed her needs when they didn't align with my schedule, the way I let her become the project manager of our lives while I played hero in emails. She took the blows like someone who'd rehearsed both sides of the argument in the shower. "You could have joined me in this," she said softly. "You could have been in the room." The line implied a life I wanted to live and resented not being invited to. She described the intended parents, two men who cried into their sleeves, a woman whose cancer stole her uterus but not her hope, a couple who had tried for 10 years and learned a new definition of patience. Every sentence complicated my revenge. I asked for numbers as if quantifying could tidy the chaos. The fees, the stipends, the travel reimbursements, the agency's wellness account for the surrogate's mental health subscriptions, lawyers whose cheerful emails said, "So excited for this journey." The way carnival barkers say, "Step right up." There was a burner phone in our house, a second calendar, a group chat named Storks that functioned like a secret union. Some of the women loved the attention, some loved the money, some loved the miracle, many loved all three. Claire said she loved the work and hated the hiding. Then she looked at me as if guessing the verdict. I did the dumbest thing I could have done. I took a DNA test. Not for our kids. I knew biology when it stared at me from the dinner table, but for the sliver of doubt that demanded, like a petty god, to be worshipped. The tests came back exactly as my eyes had always known. The kids were ours, all ours, and that relief felt like forgiveness and didn't become it. We tried counseling for 3 sessions until the counselor said a sentence that felt like a riddle. "You're not fighting about the past. You're fighting about the future you were not allowed to imagine." When we left the 3rd session, Claire squeezed my hand and said, "I can stop." The part of me that wanted to be righteous said, "Good." The part of me that wanted to be generous said nothing. The truest part of me knew the story had already detonated, and we were walking around collecting shiny fragments to place on a shelf. In the late-night hours, the internet became my confessor. I found forums where men typed betrayal with a reluctant tenderness, where women argued that this wasn't cheating, that the real cheating was in neglect and contempt and the 1,000 paper cuts of being invisible. Others, angrier, wrote revenge checklists like they were packing for a trip. I read all of it like weather reports for a storm already over our roof. What I wanted, what America sells in tidy arcs, was a clean morale. Bad guy, good guy, lesson learned, roll credits. Instead, I had a wife who wasn't a monster and wasn't a saint, a marriage with a fracture you could not spackle with more date nights. And a story that would always carry a footnote I could feel even in rooms where we never said the word surrogate. On deposition day, the conference room smelled like coffee that had survived multiple wars. The agency's attorney was brisk, kind the way professionals are kind when they don't plan to bleed. My attorney arranged his pens like you arrange soldiers when you know the battle is mostly ceremonial. We weren't suing for the money. We were suing for a boundary, for the idea that if a family is a boat, you don't drill a hole under your seat and call it charity. The law has a way of translating heartbreak into paragraphs. Words like consent and disclosure and marital property turned our life into homework. When it was Claire's turn, she spoke in the tense calm of someone giving a weather report about a tornado that had already passed through. I met her eyes once and saw the woman I married, the one who could tell a joke with a straight face and make a grocery list read like poetry. Then I looked away, because sometimes compassion feels like treason. The kids became diplomats. Our daughter took up residence in moral philosophy and said things like, "Both can be true." Our son asked if this meant 2 Christmases, his ambition wholly American. We sat them down on a Tuesday and told them the truth, minus details, that would stitch themselves into adulthood. "We love you more than anything," I said, "because this is not a script you improvise. We're going to live in 2 houses. Our daughter asked if we were happy about that decision. I said no. Claire said no. Then we made spaghetti, because grief still needs dinner. Neighbors are a species. They brought brownies and rumors. The HOA president left a note about our trash cans and a little smiley face sticker that read, "You've got this." Someone asked me in the grocery store, "Is it true your wife?" And I said, "It's true we're getting divorced," which is the most American answer to a question that asks for spectacle. At church, a woman hugged me so long I learned intimate facts about her perfume. I stopped attending for a while because even the hymns felt like they were asking for explanations I didn't own. Revenge wanted a blood oath. It wanted yard signs and confessionals on local radio, a TED Talk about betrayal where I wore a denim jacket and said story a lot. Instead, revenge got spreadsheets. It got the quiet satisfaction of a custody schedule that respected our kids' routines more than our need to win. It got a realtor with sharp shoes who said, "We'll get you a great number," like a priest offering communion. It got me remembering to water plants I used to think watered themselves. It got Claire apologizing to my parents in a voice I won't forget, and me saying, "I know," in a voice that made the air colder by a few degrees. Moving day came with the dignity of cardboard. We made piles: keep, donate, trash, memory. I found our first apartment's lease, a relic from a time when we thought adulthood was an improv show we were talented enough to fake. I found the camcorder. We had a camcorder with tapes labeled Christmas '09 and Lake Trip and Dance Recital, and in between them a blank one, which now I think of as the tape where we rehearsed our secrets. I packed the grill tools and thought about every Saturday I stood over the fire, doing my impression of a man whose life made uncomplicated sense. America loves a guy with tongs and an explanation. I had the tongs. The explanation had moved out. In my new place, the rental with the beige walls that teach humility, I sleep better than I expected. I stocked the pantry with the essentials: pasta, peanut butter, snacks my kids pretend not to like but devour during movies. I hung pictures with the caution of a guest. Sometimes I drive past the clinic without meaning to. Geography is muscle memory. Suite 405's elevator still opens and closes like a secret breathing. I don't hate it. I don't love it. It's a door that was never mine to command. Here's the part where the conspiracy mutates into a parable. You want me to say the agency was a front for billionaires breeding an army of heirs, or that the PTA is a recruitment wing, or that the HOA president is actually the high priestess of a fertility cult that meets under the pickleball courts? I can give you those shadows because our minds crave them. They are comforting, those ridiculous stories. They let you aim blame at something with a logo. The truth is smaller and messier. A woman wanted to matter twice at once and was told by a glossy intake packet that she could. A man wanted to be generous and heroic and was told by pride that he already was. A family called itself strong and learned that strength without honesty is just an attractive word. If you still need labels, fine. Betrayal? Yes, in bold. Infidelity? In the sense that fidelity means faithfulness to shared reality, absolutely. Cheating? Not in bed, but in the book where we kept score of each other's courage. Toxic love? On days ours had a half-life. Revenge? I set it down. I do not need to live inside a courtroom forever. The phrase cheating wife will follow us like a tabloid headline that refuses to die. People choose the version that keeps their worldview neat. Inside our house, when it was our house, the more dangerous headline was Silent Husband. I am not excusing anything. I am expanding the frame because frames can save you from becoming the worst story you've heard about yourself. Sometimes, late, I draft letters I will never send to people who don't know this happened. Dear you, I write, we loved each other for a long time. We still do in a way that refuses nouns. We raised good kids. We failed loudly and quietly. We learned the difference between secrets and privacy. We learned that a clinic can be holy to someone and horrifying to someone else. We learned to ask better questions. We learned that endings can go first and still lead somewhere you can live. On a Tuesday, betrayal, like PTA meetings, loves Tuesdays, I ran into Claire at the grocery store. We did small talk like professionals. Then she reached for the same jar of marinara, and we both laughed. An old laugh, the kind that made cashiers look up. You look good, she said, code for you look like someone who sleeps. You too, I said, code for I hope the weather inside your head is gentle. We didn't mention Suite 405 or lawyers or the yard sign that has already found new love. We stood between pasta and pickles like two actors who once carried a show that got canceled and still send each other Christmas cards. As we walked away, she turned, like something had pulled on a string attached to her shoulder blades, and said, I never meant to break us. I said, I know. And in that sentence was all the forgiveness I had, which is to say, not enough, and also not nothing. So here is my final American moral, written not for virality, but for anyone who's ever sorted their life into bins in the garage and found a bag of syringes beside the beer. Love is a contract you renew daily with the truth. It's not a savings account you secretly fund with noble lies. A family is not a brand campaign. And if your marriage ever asks you to choose between being right and being kind, pick being honest first and hope kindness grows there. 18 years is not erased. It is archived. Some nights, in the rental, I play those old tapes and let the past be itself without cross-examination. I make spaghetti. I set 4 plates anyway. And when I pray, quietly, imperfectly, I don't ask for revenge. I ask for the courage to imagine a future I'm allowed to see.